Hi, everybody, and welcome to another lesson of Tanya. We started chapter 20 and we'll continue tonight. Just a little bit of a few points that we've discussed. The first point the Rabbi is going to be making, and it will progress in chapter 21, 22 through 25, is how is it possible that we find the many verses in the prophets and in the Torah that God was, is, and will be the same before the universe was created and after the universe was created? It's similarly impossible. Think about a man that is single, a person who is single. Once they get married, you can't call themselves single. Monopoly. You can have monopoly if you're the only business selling that product. What happens if I open up around the corner or across the street? Same business, same merchandise. Can you have a monopoly? It's impossible. If I am the only child in a family, and then another child was born, you can't be called the only child. We say that God did not, the world and God has not changed before the world was created and after. Every morning in prayer we say that. The prophets are loaded with verses where they say that God was, is, and will be the same. It doesn't make sense because there is a universe. The other point the Rabbi is going to make, which is the entire Torah, all of the 613 commandments are combined into the first two of the 10 commandments. That's why they are the only two that we heard directly from God. The other 8 we watch as Moshe was delivering them on behalf of God. The first of the 10 is, I'm your God. The second one is, do not worship any other gods. Every commandment that God gave us, to be honest when we do business, to keep Shabbat, to keep kosher, to celebrate Passover, they all are an offshoot, an expansion, and one of the two. The positive are from the first, the negative are from for the second. And I shared with you what the Rabbi is going to explain, that an extension of I am your God is following God's commandments. An extension of idol worship is disobeying God. God says, don't eat non-kosher food. When someone disobeys God, it's worshiping idols. Why? As we have discussed last week, he is rising up against the God's unity, which is only God around. And that's the Kabbalistic interpretation to the verse, I am God and there is none else. None else doesn't mean no other gods or idols. It means there is nothing else, period. No universes, galaxies, stars, sun, moon, people, nature, etc. does not exist. The Rabbi started explaining in details. And the Rabbi went on to explain the value of one word for the entire span of a human being's life, saying words. And I went through the exercise. An average person speaks in 1 minute 100 words. In an hour, 6,000. In a day, 108,000. In a lifetime, in a year, which is 365 days, it's about 3.9 million. In the span of a lifetime, 80 years, it's 3.1 and change billion words. Compared one word to 3.1 billion words, and hence the percentage would be 0.00000003. It's so minuscule, it's so little that it has no value. When God created the universe, he uses 10 utterances, 10 sentences. They are totally combined into 127 words. You can find them in the first chapter of the book of Genesis. Putting words, now comparing the spoken word of speech to words of thinking, and we got into the idea last week that thought, in our thoughts, in our brains, thinking words is way, way greater than speaking. I told you there is no research on how many words a person can think in a moment. An average person speak 100, but thinking is a minimum between 200 to 400. So it's a minimum twice as much. And there is no actual number because it depends what level of thinking, as we'll get into a little further. The ideas that people go through in their minds that later they need to express them in words will take many, many moments or sometimes hours, a train of thought that took only 10 seconds. And I shared with you that the Arizal once on a Shabbat afternoon, he rested for an hour and a half. And they asked him, what happened in the dream? He said, I studied Torah. And I asked him, can you show what you've discovered? He says, if I were to share with you, it will take many lifetimes to share the hour and a half that I studied. Why? Because the thought in the brains, in the intelligence. Now, this is comparing to speech. The soul is endless. The soul was not created. God breathed into man, into its nostrils, a breath of life, which is the soul. So something that has no limit, one or a million, has no value. So one spoken word compared to one word of thinking is so much farther. And one word that we're thinking about has very little value because the soul does not think only for 80 years. The soul thinks forever. And therefore, says the Rebbe, put all that together and compare that to God, who is not even a soul. You can imagine that 127 words are so little that they have no value. And therefore, God exists after the universe was created, the same as before the universe was created. In chapter 21 and 22, the Rabbi is going to look at it from the human perspective. We see ourselves as a full existence. And I think I touched upon it about the two men, the rabbi and the heretic that went to the Rebbe asking, how is it possible, this contradiction? We're going to see the human perspective, which is totally different than God's perspective, which is opposite. But right now, we need to understand that therefore, everything is God. There is nothing else. And whenever someone rises against God, they are worshiping idols. They are coming to say, God is not the only one. There is something else. That's the idea, the deep idea of in Kabbalah about any of the commandments. So if God told us, love your fellow as yourself, how is it possible to connect it to the first commandment of the 10 commandments? The answer is, if you follow God's desires, you are nullified to God. You allow for God to be all everywhere. What happens if you do not respect that commandment and you don't like a fellow as yourself? Now you're rising against God, and therefore that creates an idol. That is an idol. So the 365 negative prohibitive commandments are there to guard us from straying away, from going away from God. The 248 commandments are there to help us connect to God. As soon as we follow those instructions or those the codes, we are one with God. And therefore, now we know that there is only one God who created heaven and earth. That's the first point the Rabbi explained. Today, we're going to expand on those points. The Rabbi, so I'm going to show it you an introduction, so when we study it in the text, it's easier to follow. The Rabbi, I shared the following story about Elijah and the false prophets. We read it in the Haftarah about twice a year. It depends. This year we skipped it. It was in the Haftarah of Kitisa, I think, the story of the golden calf. The week where we studied the golden calf, we read about Elijah. Elijah the prophet turned to the Jewish people and says, until when would you be jumping on both sides? You're holding the ropes on both ends. It's impossible. Either you follow the Baal. Baal is an idol that they worship, or follow God. And then he made a test. I hope everybody is familiar. I showed you the test many times where they went on Mount Carmel. It's a mountain, a tall mountain in Haifa, outside of part of Haifa, down in Israel in the north. And they created an altar. They hid a man under the altar to ignite the fire when the signal will arrive. However, God sent a snake that beat the man and he died. So they kept screaming, and Elijah says, maybe God is taking a siesta. You have to wake him up, scream to you, God, louder. At the end of the day, they couldn't bring fire from their God. And then God created, and then Elijah the prophet built an altar. He knew what the cheating they did. So to make sure they see that he does not act that way, he built an altar in front of them, and he created a what? A ring of water, a channel of water, so no fire can cross. And then he prayed to God, and fire came from above and consumed the sacrifice he placed on the altar and the ground as well. Everybody ran and says, God is the Lord, God is the Lord. And then as the story ends, I love it, he took all the 400 false prophets, he threw them over the mountain for the final destination. The question that comes, to see if they can fly, yeah. The question that everybody is asking is, how is it possible for Elijah to turn to the Jewish people and say, if the Baal is your God, follow him. If God is the Lord, follow him. In other words, he's giving them a license to worship idols. He tells them, if that's what you believe, you should follow it. He is a prophet of God. How is it possible? And the answer, there are different answers. The answers in our context, he knew full well that a Jew will not be willing to be separated from God. We study it in chapter 17 and 18, that the Jewish people, even though they disobey God many times, they are foolishly convincing themselves they are not separated. But when someone at a gunpoint is pointed out, is being forced, God, or else they will not be willing to separate from God. Therefore, Elijah said to them, you know why you worship idols? Because you're jumping on both sides. In the morning, you go to pray at the minyan to God. In the afternoon, you go worship idols. As long as you pray, you say, I'm still connected to my God. But that's not the way it works. If you believe in and you worship idols, you cannot pray to God. It doesn't work. That's why he says to them, if the Baal is the Lord, is the creator, is a God, just follow him. Stop going to synagogue. You cannot do both. Doing both is what is letting them to be deceived that they are still connected to God. And therefore, they were able to tear themselves away from the idols. Why do I share that? It goes back, and it's same idea. And that is, the only reason we sin is because we are being led to the false belief that we are not separated from God. What the rabbi will pound on this point many times for many chapters. There is no such thing as gray area. There is only black and white, either holy or unholy, acceptable or unacceptable, godly or ungodly. There is no gray area. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a time, I'm taking a break. There is no such thing. And therefore, once we understand that, a sin is an idol worshiping. The punishment is not the same, but we need, as soon as we acknowledge that it is akin to idol worshiping because we're creating a separate entity from God, that will prevent us and assist us in staying away from sin. That explains many concepts in Judaism, and I want to share with you one more. Maybe I'll go to a second one that are very current. We are about to celebrate Passover in 2 weeks, Monday night, which is an opportunity for me to share an invitation for anyone wishing to join us for the Seder. Let me know. We are almost full. We are 90% full already. Probably in 2 days we'll close off for the first night. Also, tomorrow from noon to noon, the giving challenge is taking place. Up to $100 will be matched by the Sarasota Foundation, by the foundation. Please help us. For everything you do, up to 100 will be matched by the community foundation. I will be sending out emails and with links to contribute. Back to our discussion. We're about to celebrate the holiday of Passover. There is one central figure in the holiday of Passover, and we have many scholars here who have been celebrating Passover for many years, so perhaps they can answer. We begin with the idea of Laban, the Aramean, that he tried to destroy and uproot all of us. Anybody is familiar with that? Lavan bikesh lakor esakol. Laban tried to uproot all of our future. And God has prevented him. That's the statement we make. I don't understand. Maybe you can help me. Was Laban the only one who tried to hurt the family of Jacob? He had a brother, Esau. Esau sent his son, his grandson, Eliphaz, to try and kill Yaakov, right? Only because Eliphaz was a righteous man, he did not do it. How come we don't talk about Esau? How come we talk about Laban? In addition, Laban is our grandfather. You like it or not, but he's the father of Rachel and Leah, Zilpah and Bilhah. So how can we bash Laban but not do the same to Esau? And there were many other people later on that tried to hurt us. Can anybody come up with us an answer, a solution? Harry, you're the scholar I'm looking at. So here is the answer. When you have an enemy that is an open enemy and he tells you their thoughts, their intention, it's not so bad. That person is not so evil. And the reason is we can prevent ourselves from getting hurt. We can protect ourselves. Esau was very open about his intention. He did not hide his intention. And therefore, we cannot hate him or despise him or blame him. That's the way he was. He told us the way it is. So we know how to protect ourselves. And we find that Jacob protected himself with preparing for a war, sending gifts. I'm sure you're familiar with the text and so on. Laban, on the other hand, was a friend. He loves us. He turns to Jacob and he says, why did you run away? You didn't let me kiss my daughters and my grandchildren. For 22 years, he never kissed them. But now that Jacob already had enough and he left, he's missing. He wanted to kiss them goodbye. He didn't want to kiss them goodbye. He wanted them not to exist, but he wouldn't tell it the way it is. How do we know? The only reason, the following is the Kabbalah interpretation. I'm sure you didn't hear that. The only reason we mention Laban on the Passover night is because he is the instigator. He's the reason we went to slavery in Egypt. And here is how it works. The only reason that Joseph was hated or sold to Egypt by the brothers is because Laban mixed the two women. He cheated Yaakov and he put Leah instead of Rachel. Rachel was supposed to be his wife. If Rachel would be the wife the way it meant to be, the first child would be not Reuben, but Yosef. If Yosef would be first, he would have never been sold and we would never end up in Egypt. So all of the trouble began as an outcome of Laban's cheating Yaakov. That's what caused the jealousy between the brothers, that they sold him as a slave, and later they had to atone and going back to Egypt. And that's the reason we mentioned Laban, that he tried to uproot all of our future, because the way he did it is in a very masked way. Evil, and this is the theme of and I want to share another theme with this week's portion. Evil is able to overpower or control or have a hold in us only by deception, not by being open about its intention and desire. They come and tell you that you're not going to be ripped away, removed from God. They come and say it's not such a big sin. There's nothing wrong. And that's what leads us to the point of, it's okay, it's not so bad. I'm still praying to God. I'm still studying Torah. The rabbi is coming to us to teach us that because the foundation of all 613 commandments are I'm you God and there is no other gods, the only way to explain I am you God and there is none else is when we realize that everything is united with God. It's part of God and there is nothing else. Before the universe created and after the universe created is the same. What happened when I disobey God? I'm the only one who can disobey God. Angels, animals, planets, they cannot disobey God. I am able to because God gave me a free choice. As soon as I disobey God, I worship idols. I actually separate myself from God. Laban, when he's trying to hurt the Jewish people, he didn't do it openly, and therefore we are cursing him every year even though it's my grandfather and our grandfather. But unfortunately, it's very sad. He's trying to hurt us. If he was open about his intention, telling us, I don't like you, I'm jealous of you, I want to hurt you, it's a different story. There is no reason to curse him and mention him continuously in such a despicable way. Esau actually was worse than Laban. Esau came with 400 men to maim and kill every single soul of of Jacob's family. We don't hate him for it because he had whatever reasons, but he wasn't trying to deceive. Did I make myself clear? I don't want to go deeper. I'm just going to touch upon. In this week's Torah portion, we got about leprosy, about discoloration of the skin or the garments or the house. What's the colors that are defined as not good colors? Anybody knows? White. How many shades of white? 4 shades of white. There are 4 shades of white. The rabbis are asking, how is it possible that white is chosen by God as the shade that makes a person impure? If I have yellow or brown or green, it's kosher. There is no leprosy, only if it's white. And the reason is, I'm giving you the gist of it, is I don't want to go too far. The reason is because leprosy arrives upon a person for what? Anybody? No, it's God's punishment, so it's not a natural occurrence. Yes, Linda? Lashon hara. For speaking. Moshe, when he spoke in complimentary about the Jewish people, God says to him, stick your hand, and he takes it out, and it says his hand is with leprosy, white like snow. Metzorat kasheleg. It says in the Torah like snow. When Miriam is speaking against Moshe, suddenly what happens? She's afflicted with tzarat, with leprosy. What? Kasheleg, like snow. It says in the Torah the word snow.
Yeah, it's a death.
All right. I'm not going to argue. All I'm saying is that white is pure and clean. It should be red, should be yellow, green. Here is my explanation for today, is that the reason, the snakes, I think I shared with you, the snake is leprosy. He spoke Lashon hara. When God punished the serpent, that's why the snakes has different colors, and many of them are white spots. Spots of white. I'm not talking about black racer. I'm talking about most of the snakes. They have the white spots of white. It's a tzarat. It's a resembling leprosy. I don't want to go too far. All I wanted to say is, because when a person gets embarrassed, they get paled, they're white. Therefore, the tzarat is white. Why do I share that with you? Because the law is that if the entire body became white, the person is pure. There is no problem. Only when some spots turned white, a minimum measurement of about a dime. But what if it's spread all over the body and the entire body turned white? The Torah says that is tahor, that is pure. It's not a problem. One of the reasons the rabbi tells us is because at that moment, a person cannot hide anymore the leprosy. Whenever they have a spot, let's say in a place that nobody sees, or even on his face, he can decide not to walk out and nobody watches him, nobody sees him. If he does not go to a kohen to look at it, he will never be impured, because he has to decide to take the step to go to a kohen to get purified, to ask, and then if it is. But when it's the entire body, there is no way to hide anymore. And therefore, it's just like I shared with you at Laban. Laban is Lavan, also white. You know, his name is white. It's the same concept of the leprosy. Because he was hiding his intention, that's what make him so despicable. As soon as he's in an open and he shares and he tells us how he feels, it doesn't matter how he feels, we don't have to hate him so much. And that's why in tzarat, in leprosy, if it's spread all over the body, in other words, there's no way of hiding it anymore, he's pure. There is nothing wrong with that person. As soon as it decreases and it recedes and only some parts of the body, that's when he should go to a kohen. If he chooses to, he don't have to. If he chooses, he or she chooses to. I want to go back to our discussion. So the rabbi, so far what I showed, we already, I believe, talked about mostly last week. Now we're going to get into the process of speech. The rabbi is going to use an analogy that I'm sharing with you, as we'll read it in a moment. Imagine that you go into Home Depot and you turn to a salesman in the electrical department and you say, I want this lamp to the entrance of my home. Now, the words, I want this lamp, where did it come from in our life? Says the Rebbe, there are three stages in the mind, in intelligence. We're not talking about people who speak foolish words. The first is the desire. I want to have light when I walk outside the door at night. This is called intelligence. In my brains, I knew I don't like to open the door to come home at night and there is darkness. I want to have light. The second process is in the heart. We imagine how it feels if there is light above the door outside, and how it feels if there is no light. And that brings it into the thinking process. How can I accommodate? How can I achieve the idea of creating light at night? So when I walk into the house, by the entrance, there is light. That will lead me, once I think, oh, I need to go to Home Depot or Lowe's or to a lighting store, and that will lead to what we call action at this point, where I'm going to find a salesman and I'm going to tell him what I need, and he will give me some ideas, and I will weigh it in my mind. Is this what I want? Is this going to cost me the electric bill? Is this going to provide enough lighting? Is this going to be working well with the decor of the layout of or the looks of the house, etc.? The question is, when does the idea of words, did everybody understand the process I just shared with you? Again, there is called seichel, intelligence. I have a need. it goes to the heart. That's the second point, where I start imagining what is missing and how will I feel when it's met. Then it goes through the brains. The brains start thinking how to get that. How do I have to save? Do I have enough money? Will I be paying? Will I ask someone to help me with the payments? And that makes me travel to Home Depot and speak.
Stuff in the brain goes to the heart, goes back to the brain.
Right. The internal aspect of the brain is expressed. It's not the brain, it's the soul. But the soul is expressed and resides in the brains. And the soul resides all over, but it's felt in the brains. But yeah, the brain's heart goes back to the brain. And then you're actually speaking. You talk to someone asking, assuming you didn't go on Amazon.com and you didn't talk to your computer. Now the question is, the rabbi is asking, when those words came through my mind? When was I thinking with words? Says the Rebbe, that when the first step of intelligence, there is no words there. Surprise, surprise, when I think about my need, the first idea, there are no words. When I feel it, the light, it should be lit, or the feeling of darkness, there is no words. The only time words come in is the third stage of machshava, of thinking about how to achieve what I want because I have a need. That's when words in my brains will start playing. Those words, one word of all the process is so minute compared to the previous two stages that they have no value. Then I'll use the words when I speak, but that's already spoken words, not thinking words. And that's what the rabbi is going to say, that the words are so far removed from the soul, because it takes few stages before the soul starts using words to express itself. Even internally, there are two stages beforehand that took place. And therefore, that when God spoke, the whole idea is for the rabbi to explain that when God spoke, actually those words meant nothing to God, have no value, because even for us thinking, words for thinking come after so many two other stages that prior, that makes the words an external of external of external. Here it is in the text. We are, I would like to, the bottom of page 285, I believe we studied it, but it's worth repeating. The letters are formed only when one applies his thoughts to a particular idea of a feeling, as explained further. We will talk soon about expressing myself without words. I think I told you last week that in this chapter, the rabbi is going to allude to. Sometimes words are not the proper tools. Can anyone share an example where we express our emotions, our feelings without words? Crying, thank you. Hugging, thank you. Laughing. Holding hands. What about looks? Looking at each other. In other words, sometimes the emotions are so powerful that the words cannot contain the emotions. And therefore, you need to use other modes. How many times people say, don't take my words? Don't, what do they say? You got me by the words, but they...
Don't take me literally.
Huh?
Don't take me literally.
Don't take me literally. In Hebrew, there are, you catch me by, in Hebrew, there is a phrase, don't catch me by the words, by my words. In other words, it didn't come out. My words did not truly express how I felt or what I wanted to say. I'm sure there is such a phrase in English as well. In other words, words are containers. And thank you. The words don't do justice. In other words, we need to understand, by the way, next week, we're going to talk about words, how powerful they are, and that one word can change the universe, and especially from God's perspective. But right now, what we discover is that words actually are so far in the chain of the soul by the time it reaches words of thinking, not speaking, that they don't necessarily do justice. Thank you, Liam. They don't do justice to my feeling. That's why I think I showed it to you last week. There are times where words hinder the transformation of the emotions. Sometimes, if we were to speak, it actually hurts. It actually creates a barrier of the emotions that are going between two people. By the way, there are times where words are discouraged in the relationship between husband and wife, but that's not for tonight.
Things are better left unsaid. Things are better left unsaid.
That's because you don't want to be held accountable, or you don't want arguments. But it's more about you are unable to fully express how you feel with words, because words are very limited. We're going to discover next week, next lesson, the opposite. But right now, since the intellectual and emotional soul powers are so subtle and amorphous that they cannot be defined even in terms of a spiritual thought letters, they are obviously of an altogether different, more spiritual order than thought, and the spoken word is surely without value in comparison to them. What follows is a description of the process whereby the letters of thought are formed. And here is the rabbi is going to share with us. I shared with you the example of going shopping for light in Home Depot. For example, by the way, among Hasidim, and I strongly suggest that you use it. I don't see people, tell me if I'm wrong. Melody, singing melody. That's why the Hasidic melodies have no words. Did you ever we sing ay? There's no words. Because the melody is to express a yearning, a happiness, sadness, missing. So most of the Hasidic melodies have names, but there are no words. Most of them, and there are plenty of melodies, Hasidic melodies, because they express the soul. I'm sure if you were to hear a soulful melody, it would awaken a feeling of love or yearning or memory. You don't need those words. And perhaps that's why concerts, I don't know, maybe, where instruments play instead of humans interjecting the words are very, very powerful. Because it's another form of expressing of the heart's desire or the nigun, that's nigun. When I grow up, I can tell my father's mood based on the melody that he sings, melody he sings. Because if he's happy, it's just one of you. But you can tell the person's feeling at the moment based on the melody. These are melodies without words. This is one of them that you shared with me, hugging, holding hands, looking, being there. Melody is one of them, very, very powerful one. Now the rabbi is going to talk about the process by which words of thoughts are created. For example, I am at page 286 on top. For example, when a man suddenly becomes conscious of a certain love or desire in his heart, before it has risen from the heart to the brain to meditate on it and ponder it, it has not yet acquired the element of letters. It is only a pure desire and longing for the object of his affection. Remember, I told you, he wants to have light outside the door going into the house at night. And now in his heart, the feeling of how it feels with light and how it feels without. All the more so, before he began to feel in his heart a craving and desire for that thing, when it was yet confined within the realm of his intellect, chokhmah, understanding corresponding to bina, and knowledge that, meaning that the thing was known to him to be desirable and gratifying, something good and pleasant to attain and to cling to, as, for instance, to study a certain discipline or to eat some delicacy. Then, in this state of intellectual appreciation of the desirable object, before the appreciation has even developed into an emotion, there are certainly no ladder present in one's mind. That's the first. He knows he wants light there. There is no words in the brains. Then when he has a desire in his heart, it goes to the heart to feel how it feels. There is no words. Only after the desire and craving have already descended into his heart, that is, after they have developed into emotions through the stimulus of his wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and only after they have ascended once again from the heart back to the brain to think and meditate on how to implement his desire by actually obtaining that food or actually studying that subject, it is only at this point, when one applies his thought to implementing his desire, that letters are born in one's mind, corresponding to the language of each one of the nations who employed these letters when speaking and thinking about everything in the world. That is, each of us thinks in his own language. In other words, there were three steps. The first is the need. The second is feeling the emotions. And only the third step, how to reach that goal, how to obtain it, that's when words are formed. Pure feeling, however, that is, feeling that has not yet reached the applied, implemental stage of thought, transcends differences of nations and languages, since it does not express itself in letters. In other words, what the Rabbi tells us, that emotions themselves are wordless. They have no words. It's feeling. All nations, all people, it may be Chinese, Russian, Portuguese, Hebrew, English, it doesn't matter. Emotions are all equally the same. That's why children can communicate very well of different backgrounds and different languages, because they usually convey their emotions. So therefore, language is not a barrier. Children can understand each other just by looking at their facial or by the way they express their emotions. Only for us, I need that light. I need to buy the light. Now I'm going to use words in my brains, thinking how to find how to reach that. Which store do I go? How much money am I going to spend? What am I going to tell the guy? What color the walls and what color of the lamp is going to be? But beforehand, my emotions in the heart, and before the emotions, the intellect that got me the first idea that I needed, there is no words. In other words, the Rabbi is telling us that words are so external in the brain, within the thinking process, even compared to the soul. From all this, we may understand the Alter Rebbe's earlier statement that a spoken word is utterly without value in comparison with the soul's intellectual and emotional powers, which are described here for our purpose as the essence of the soul. Surely then the divine word by which God creates and animates all the worlds has no value at all next to God, who is truly and absolutely infinite. Thus, all the worlds created and sustained by the divine word are as if non-existence from God's perspective, and their presence does not affect any change in his unity. This theme will be further discussed in the following chapter. And at chapter 21, the Rabbi is going to talk further about how is it possible for God to be the only one, and the power of word from God's spoken word. So far what we discovered is the idea that the word is so far from the soul, one word, and the soul is infinite, so definitely there is no value. Compare that to God's word, has no value at all. So if you take all the universe, everything God created, he used 127 words. All 127 words are so little. It's just like a speckle of dirt, of soil here in the corner of the room. You can't even see it. And nobody can tell you that a room is clean or not clean before and after that speckle was here. The same is the universe. The only one who can rise up and stand up to God is the human. When we disobey God, or when we obey God, we are part of the flow and part of godliness. And that's why it all stems from the first two commandments. Next week, the rabbi is going to talk about the power of a single word. And I want to share with you a story. There was a Sergei, a Russian man in Siberia, who once said that he ended up 25 years in Siberia for a single word. What happened? He says that his house is in Moscow on the main thoroughfare, main boulevard, where they do an annual march on May 1st or whatever the May Day, which is May 1st. Okay, not Cinco de Mayo.
That's a week later.
Oh. He says, but because he lived on the second or third story, he would sit on the porch, hang the photos, the pictures of the communist leaders, and watch as they are marching with the tanks and army, soldiers, etc. One year, one of the leaders was sent to be executed, was executed. And he didn't know about it. Not everybody can afford a radio. So came the next year, the march, May 1st came, he hung the picture of that man on the porch. And as the march is coming, one of the soldiers shouted, "Remove the dog!" So he said, "Kakoi." Kakoi means, which one? He says, for that, he got 25 years. One word, kakoi. You know, the power of words goes the other way around. As we'll discover, it can, as King Solomon says, it can create life and it can destroy life, one word. And that's going to be the topic of the next week's discussion. So we'll stop right here and continue next. Be well, guys.
Be well, guys.